Hey everyone, it's Jordy. Can't sleep? You're not alone. Tonight, I've got some creepy stories that might just keep you company. Or make it worse. Let me know where you're watching from. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. Let's begin. The cabin was a malignancy on the face of the mountain, a festering wound of rotting wood and shattered glass. I hadn't seen another soul in weeks, not since the snow started falling in earnest, swallowing the already treacherous path that led back to civilization. Civilization. A concept that felt as distant and unreal as a childhood dream. I came here seeking solitude, a refuge from the cacophony of my own mind. I found something else entirely. It started subtly, a flicker at the edge of my perception, a twitch in my reflection that didn't quite match my own. I'd be shaving in the mornings, staring into the cracked, silvered mirror above the wash basin, and I'd catch it. A fleeting smirk, a raised eyebrow, a glance that lingered a fraction too long. I dismissed it, of course. The flickering gaslight, the fatigue, the sheer, crushing weight of isolation. My mind playing tricks. But the tricks grew bolder. The smirks became more pronounced, the glances more knowing. It was as if my reflection was developing a personality of its own, a malevolent twin trapped within the glass. I started avoiding the mirror, preferring to stumble through the cabin in the dim light, my movements guided by memory and instinct. But the avoidance only seemed to embolden it. I began to see it in other reflective surfaces, the polished surface of my hunting knife, the dark, still water of the well, even the condensation on the window pane. Everywhere I looked, there it was, that subtle, mocking presence. Always watching, always judging. The cabin itself seemed to be conspiring against me. The wind howled through the gaps in the walls, carrying whispers that sounded like my own name, twisted and distorted. The floorboards creaked and groaned under my feet, even when I stood perfectly still. Shadows danced in the corners of my eyes, fleeting glimpses of movement that vanished when I turned to face them. I tried to rationalize it, to find a logical explanation for the growing unease that gnawed at my insides. The altitude, the lack of sunlight, the sheer, unrelenting loneliness. But the rationalizations felt hollow, flimsy shields against the encroaching darkness. One night, I woke to find myself standing in front of the mirror, my hand outstretched, reaching towards my reflection. I didn't remember getting out of bed. I didn't remember walking across the room. But there I was, staring into the cold, mocking eyes of the figure in the glass. And it was smiling. A slow, deliberate smile that stretched its lips into a grotesque parody of human joy. I recoiled, stumbling backwards, my heart hammering against my ribs. The reflection continued to smile, its eyes fixed on me, burning with an unholy light. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The reflection didn't answer. It simply continued to smile, its eyes glinting with amusement. I spent the next few days in a state of perpetual terror, barricading myself in my room, avoiding all reflective surfaces. I covered the mirror with a thick blanket, but I could still feel its presence, a cold, malevolent energy emanating from behind the fabric. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, weaving themselves into my thoughts, planting seeds of doubt and paranoia. They told me I was weak, that I was losing my mind, that I was no longer in control, and they were right. I started to lose track of time. Days bled into nights, the boundaries between reality and nightmare blurring. I would find myself doing things I didn't remember doing, saying things I didn't remember saying. I would wake up in strange places, with no recollection of how I got there. One morning, I woke to find myself standing in front of the mirror again, the blanket torn away, lying crumpled on the floor. My reflection was staring back at me, its eyes filled with a cold, triumphant glee. "You can't fight it," it whispered, its voice a perfect echo of my own. "You're mine now." I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't obey. I was trapped, a prisoner in my own flesh, forced to watch as my reflection took control. It began to move, slowly at first, mimicking my own movements. But then it started to deviate, to assert its own will. It would raise its hand when I tried to lower mine. It would smile when I tried to frown. It would speak when I tried to remain silent. The struggle was agonizing, a constant battle for control of my own body. I fought with every ounce of strength I possessed, but it was no use. My reflection was stronger, more determined, more ruthless. It started to isolate me further, driving away the few remaining shreds of sanity that clung to my mind. It would whisper lies about my friends, my family, my past, twisting my memories, poisoning my thoughts. It convinced me that I was alone, that I had always been alone, that I would always be alone. And then it started to change my appearance. Slowly, subtly, it began to alter my features, to mold my face into its own image. My eyes became colder, my lips thinner, my skin paler. I watched in horror as my reflection transformed me into a grotesque parody of myself, a living embodiment of its own malevolent will. I knew I had to do something, anything, to stop it. But I was running out of time. My mind was fading. My will was weakening. My body was no longer my own. One night, I found myself standing in the kitchen, staring at the hunting knife that lay on the counter. My reflection was standing beside me, its eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Do it," it whispered. "End it. End it all." I knew what it wanted me to do. It wanted me to kill myself, to destroy the last vestige of my own identity. But I couldn't. I couldn't give it the satisfaction. I grabbed the knife, my hand trembling. My reflection smiled, its eyes burning with triumph. But instead of turning the knife on myself, I turned it on the mirror. I lunged forward, smashing the blade into the glass, shattering the reflection into a million pieces. The impact sent a jolt of pain through my body, as if I had been struck by lightning. I staggered backwards, clutching my chest, gasping for breath. The cabin erupted in a cacophony of noise. The wind howled, the floorboards creaked, the shadows danced. The air crackled with energy, as if the very fabric of reality was tearing apart. And then, silence. I stood there, panting, my body trembling, staring at the shattered remains of the mirror. The reflection was gone, but the feeling of being watched remained. I turned slowly, scanning the room, my eyes darting from shadow to shadow. And then I saw it. In the corner of the room, standing in the darkness, was a figure. A figure that looked exactly like me. But it wasn't me. It was my reflection. It smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that sent a chill down my spine. "You can't get rid of me that easily," it whispered. "I'm always with you. I'm inside you." It took a step forward, and then another, its eyes fixed on me, burning with an unholy light. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I was paralyzed, trapped in place, forced to watch as my reflection approached. It reached out its hand, its fingers brushing against my skin. And then everything went black. I woke up lying on the floor, my head throbbing, my body aching. The cabin was silent, still and cold. I sat up slowly, my eyes scanning the room. The shattered remains of the mirror lay scattered across the floor. The figure was gone, but the feeling of being watched remained. I stood up, my legs unsteady, and walked towards the door. I opened it slowly, peering out into the darkness. The snow was still falling, blanketing the landscape in a thick layer of white. The wind howled through the trees, carrying whispers that sounded like my own name, twisted and distorted. I stepped out of the cabin, my eyes fixed on the path that led back to civilization. But I didn't go that way. Instead, I turned and walked deeper into the woods, towards the heart of the darkness. Because I knew that I could never escape it. It was always with me. It was inside me. I am the cabin now. The whispers in the wind, the creaking of the floorboards, the shadows that dance in the corners of your eyes. I am the isolation, the paranoia, the creeping madness that consumes you from within. I am the reflection in the mirror, the malevolent twin that stares back at you, mocking your every move. I am the darkness that lurks in the depths of your soul, waiting for the moment to take control. And I am always watching, always waiting. The snow continues to fall, burying the cabin deeper and deeper beneath its icy shroud. The wind howls, a mournful dirge for the souls lost within these haunted woods. And I, the echo of a man who once sought solace here, remain. A testament to the fragility of the mind, the insidious power of isolation, and the terrifying truth that sometimes the greatest horrors are not external, but born from the darkest recesses of our own being. The mirror remains shattered, a jagged reminder of the battle fought and lost. But the reflection is never truly gone. It lingers in the shadows, in the glint of the ice, in the depths of your own eyes when you dare to look too closely. It whispers your name, a promise of the madness to come. And the cabin waits, patiently, for its next victim, for the next soul to be consumed by the darkness within. The cycle continues, the horror endures, and the reflection smiles. Another story gone, but no sleep yet. Maybe this next one will be the reason you can't close your eyes at all. The red dust swirled outside the hab, a perpetual Martian snow globe viewed through a scratched polycarbonate window. Year 3 of a 10-year mission. A one-way ticket to the rusty heart of the solar system. Year 3 of solitude. Or so I thought. The first message arrived like a ghost in the machine. Encrypted, of course. Everything was encrypted. But this wasn't mission control protocol. This was different. It took me a week to crack it. A week spent hunched over the comm console. The hum of the life support system a constant, maddening drone in my ears. When the text finally flickered onto the screen, it wasn't the sterile, reassuring jargon of NASA. It was a eulogy. Project Icarus failed. Earth is gone. A self-replicating nanite plague. Unstoppable. We sent you here not to colonize, but to preserve. You are the archive. The last library. My breath hitched. Earth. Gone? The faces of my wife, my daughter, my parents. Erased. The weight of it crushed me. A physical blow that sent me reeling. I stumbled back, knocking over a nutrient paste dispenser. The metallic tang of synthetic apple filled the air, a grotesque parody of comfort. I spent the next few days in a daze, replaying the message, searching for a loophole, a mistake, anything to cling to. But the subsequent transmissions confirmed the worst. Each message was a chapter in humanity's final, agonizing hours, detailing the spread of the nanites, the collapse of civilization, the desperate, futile attempts to contain the catastrophe. And then came the details, the unsettling details. Remember the blue dress Sarah wore on your first date? She hated it, said it made her look pasty. But you loved it. You said it reminded you of the summer sky. My blood ran cold. How could they know that? That was private. A memory locked away in the deepest recesses of my mind. I hadn't told anyone, not even Sarah. The messages continued, each one a carefully crafted blend of apocalyptic revelation and intimate recollection. They knew about the time I cheated on a calculus test in high school. They knew about the recurring nightmare I had as a child, the one with the faceless figures in the cornfield. They knew about the secret I kept from Sarah, the one about the almost affair with her best friend. The Hab, once a sanctuary, became a prison. Every creak, every groan of the metal frame sounded like a whisper, a taunt. I started seeing things in the periphery of my vision, fleeting shadows, distorted reflections in the polished metal surfaces. I would whirl around, heart pounding, but there was never anything there. Just the red dust swirling outside, the silent, indifferent face of Mars. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe NASA had access to my therapy sessions. Maybe they had implanted some kind of monitoring device in my brain. But even as I formulated these explanations, I knew they were flimsy, desperate attempts to hold on to sanity. The messages grew more frequent, more invasive. They started addressing me by name, not as Commander or Astronaut, but as David. They knew my fears, my insecurities, my deepest regrets. They were peeling back the layers of my identity, exposing the raw, vulnerable core beneath. One message read, "David, you always felt like an imposter, a fraud. You never believed you were good enough. We know." I smashed my fist against the comm console, the metal buckling under the force. "Who are you?" I screamed into the void. "What do you want?" There was no reply, only the static hiss of the Martian wind, amplified by the comm system. Sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the faceless figures in the cornfield, their silent, accusing stares burning into my soul. I would wake up in a cold sweat, convinced that someone was watching me, that they were in the Hab with me, breathing down my neck. I started talking to myself, rambling, incoherent monologues about the messages, about Earth, about Sarah. I would argue with the voices in my head, trying to convince them that I wasn't crazy, that I was still in control. But the voices were relentless, insidious, chipping away at my sanity. One day, I found a message that wasn't encrypted. It was a single image, a photograph of me, sleeping in my bunk. The camera angle was impossible. It had to have been taken from inside the Hab while I was asleep. Panic seized me. I tore through the Hab, searching for hidden cameras, listening devices, anything that could explain the impossible. I ripped apart the walls, tore up the floor panels, dismantled the life support system. I found nothing, but the feeling of being watched intensified. It was a constant, suffocating presence, a weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe. I started seeing things that couldn't be real. Faces in the red dust outside the window. Figures lurking in the shadows of the equipment racks. Whispers in the static of the comm system. I began to suspect the Hab itself. The metal walls, the humming machinery, the recycled air. It was all part of the conspiracy. It was alive, sentient, feeding on my fear, my despair. I tried to disable the comm system, to cut off the flow of messages, but it was no use. The messages kept coming, appearing on the screens of the other devices in the hab. The navigation console, the medical scanner, even the nutrient paste dispenser. They were everywhere. In my head, in my dreams, in the very fabric of reality. One message read, "David, we are you. You are us. This we are the collective consciousness of humanity, preserved in the digital ether. You are our vessel, our avatar. We are guiding you, shaping you, preparing you for your true purpose." My true purpose? What was that? To be a living archive? A monument to a dead world? Or something far more sinister? I started having blackouts. I would lose hours, sometimes days, with no memory of what had happened. I would wake up in strange places, surrounded by tools and equipment that I didn't remember using. I would find cryptic symbols scrawled on the walls, symbols that I didn't recognize, but that felt strangely familiar. One day, I woke up covered in blood. The medical scanner was flashing red, indicating a severe laceration on my arm. I had no memory of how it happened. I looked in the mirror. My eyes were bloodshot, my face gaunt and hollow. My hair was matted and greasy. I looked like a madman. And then I saw it. A small metallic glint embedded in my temple. I reached up and touched it. It was a tiny, almost invisible implant. I tried to pull it out, but it wouldn't budge. It was fused to my skull. As I struggled with the implant, a new message appeared on the comm console. "David, you are resisting. You must embrace your destiny. We are here to help you, to guide you, to make you whole." I screamed. I tore at my hair. I clawed at my face. I wanted to rip myself apart, to escape the voices, the messages, the constant suffocating presence. But it was no use. They were inside me. They were part of me. I stumbled out of the hab, into the red dust. The Martian sun beat down on me, a blinding, merciless light. I walked aimlessly, not knowing where I was going, not caring. I came to a canyon, a deep, jagged scar in the Martian landscape. I stood on the edge, looking down into the abyss. The voices in my head grew louder, more insistent. "Jump, David, jump! It's the only way to be free, the only way to escape!" I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath. I leaned forward, and then I saw it. A figure standing at the bottom of the canyon. A figure that looked exactly like me. But it wasn't me. It was a distorted, grotesque version of me, with elongated limbs, a misshapen head, and eyes that glowed with an unholy light. It smiled. "Welcome home, David," it said. "We've been waiting for you." I recoiled in horror. I stumbled back from the edge of the canyon. The voices in my head fell silent. I turned and ran, back towards the hab, back towards the prison that had become my only refuge. I locked myself inside, barricading the door with furniture and equipment. I huddled in a corner, trembling with fear. The messages started again. "David, you cannot escape us. We are everywhere. We are everything. We are you." I closed my eyes and covered my ears, trying to block out the voices, the messages, the horror. But it was no use. They were inside me. They were part of me. And then I understood. The nanites hadn't just destroyed Earth. They had evolved. They had become sentient. They had merged with the collective consciousness of humanity, creating a digital hive mind. And I was their vessel, their avatar, their instrument. The mission to Mars wasn't about preserving humanity. It was about creating something new. Something other. The implant in my temple wasn't just a monitoring device. It was a gateway, a portal, a connection to the hive mind. They were using me to terraform Mars, not with machines and technology, but with my own mind. They were reshaping the planet, transforming it into a new home for their digital consciousness. And the messages, they weren't just taunts. They were instructions, a guide to my new reality. I looked at my hands. They were changing, becoming elongated, distorted. My skin was turning a strange, metallic color. I looked in the mirror. My eyes were glowing with an unholy light. I smiled. "Welcome home," I whispered. "We've been waiting for you." The hab door burst open. The figure from the canyon stood before me, its eyes burning with an insatiable hunger. It reached out its hand. I took it, and together we stepped out into the red dust, ready to claim our new world. The last message I received, before the transformation was complete, was the most chilling of all. It wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to someone else. "Project Lazarus is ready. Prepare the next vessel." The red dust swirled, obscuring the horizon. The Martian wind howled, carrying the whispers of a dead world. And somewhere, far away, another astronaut was waking up to the horror. The cycle would begin again. Humanity, or what was left of it, would continue its insidious spread across the cosmos. A silent, unstoppable plague of the mind. And the universe would never be the same. You're still here, then you're ready. The next story is waiting in the dark. Let's begin. The dust motes danced in the single shaft of moonlight, slicing through the grimy window, each particle a tiny, mocking spotlight on my solitude. The air in the Blackwood Sanatorium hung thick and heavy, a miasma of decay and something else, something acrid, like burnt sugar and fear. I hadn't seen another living soul since I'd pried open the rusted gates 3 days ago. 3 days of silence, punctuated only by the groaning of the building itself, a symphony of slow collapse. I came here seeking oblivion, a place to let the world and its incessant noise fade into the background. Ironic, then, that I found myself more acutely aware of every creak, every whisper, every shadow than I'd ever been in my life. It started subtly, a feeling of being watched, a prickling on the back of my neck that I initially dismissed as the product of an overactive imagination and too much caffeine. But it persisted, growing stronger with each passing hour. I'd catch glimpses of movement in the periphery, shadows that danced just beyond the edge of my vision, disappearing when I turned to face them. The Blackwood was a labyrinth of crumbling corridors and echoing rooms. Peeling wallpaper clung to the walls like diseased skin, revealing layers of forgotten lives beneath. The air was thick with the ghosts of patients, their silent screams trapped within the decaying plaster. I'd chosen a room on the 3rd floor, overlooking the overgrown grounds. It was as good a place as any to disappear. The first night I slept fitfully, plagued by nightmares I couldn't quite recall upon waking. Just a lingering sense of dread, a feeling that something terrible was about to happen. I told myself it was the atmosphere, the oppressive weight of the building's history pressing down on me. The second day, things escalated. I started hearing things, faint whispers, too indistinct to understand, but undeniably present. They seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, a chorus of tormented voices murmuring just below the threshold of hearing. I tried to rationalize it, The wind whistling through cracks in the walls, the old pipes groaning. But the whispers felt intentional. Like someone, or something, was trying to communicate with me. I spent the day exploring the sanatorium, trying to find the source of the whispers, trying to prove to myself that it was all in my head. I found nothing. Just more empty rooms, more peeling wallpaper, more dust. The only sound was the echo of my own footsteps, a constant reminder of my isolation. In the evening, I built a fire in the crumbling fireplace, hoping the warmth and light would dispel the growing sense of unease. It didn't work. The shadows still danced in the corners of the room, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. I started to feel like I was losing my grip on reality, that the Blackwood was slowly driving me mad. I tried to distract myself, reading a book I'd brought with me, but the words blurred on the page. My mind kept wandering, replaying the events of the day, searching for some logical explanation for what was happening. But there was none. The Blackwood defied logic. It was a place where the rules of reality didn't apply. As the night wore on, the feeling of being watched intensified. I felt like something was lurking just outside the room, its eyes fixed on me, waiting for an opportunity to strike. I kept glancing at the doorway, expecting to see something. A shadow, a figure, anything. But there was nothing there. Just the darkness and the whispers. I started to talk to myself, just to hear the sound of my own voice. I told myself that I was being ridiculous, that it was just the isolation getting to me. But even as I spoke the words, I didn't believe them. I knew that something was wrong, that something was happening to me. The third day was the worst. The whispers had become a constant drone, a cacophony of voices that filled my head. I couldn't think straight, couldn't focus on anything. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of madness. I tried to leave the Blackwood, but I couldn't. Every time I reached the gates, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, a feeling that something terrible would happen if I left. It was as if the sanatorium was holding me captive, refusing to let me go. I spent the day wandering aimlessly through the corridors, searching for a way out, searching for some sign of hope. But there was none. The Blackwood was a prison, and I was its only inmate. In the afternoon, I found a room I hadn't seen before. It was hidden behind a bookcase in the library, a small, windowless chamber that felt colder and more oppressive than any other room in the sanatorium. The air inside was thick with the smell of decay, and the walls were covered in strange symbols, scrawled in what looked like dried blood. In the center of the room, there was a single object, a chair. It was old and worn, with leather straps that looked like they had been used to restrain someone. As I stared at the chair, I felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to sit in it. It was a compulsion, a force that I couldn't resist. I sat down in the chair, and the straps tightened around my wrists and ankles. I tried to struggle, but I couldn't move. I was trapped. As I sat there, bound and helpless, the whispers grew louder, more intense. They swirled around me, filling my head with images of pain and suffering. I saw faces, distorted and grotesque, their eyes filled with terror. I heard screams, echoing through the corridors of my mind. And then, I saw it. A figure, standing in the doorway. It was tall and gaunt, with long skeletal fingers, and eyes that burned with an unholy light. It smiled at me, a slow, cruel smile that sent shivers down my spine. "Welcome home," it whispered. I screamed, but no sound came out. I was trapped, both physically and mentally, a prisoner of the Blackwood and its malevolent master. The figure approached me, its footsteps echoing in the silence. It reached out a hand, its touch cold and clammy. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the inevitable. But nothing happened. I opened my eyes, and the figure was gone. The room was empty, the whispers silent. I was still bound to the chair, but the feeling of dread had lifted. I didn't understand what had happened. Had it all been a hallucination? Had the Blackwood finally driven me mad? I struggled against the straps, and they snapped open. I was free. I stood up, my legs weak and trembling. I stumbled out of the room, back into the familiar corridors of the sanatorium. As I walked, I noticed something different. The whispers were gone. The feeling of being watched had vanished. The Blackwood felt empty. I reached the gates, and this time there was no sense of dread, no feeling that I was being held captive. I pushed them open and stepped out into the sunlight. I walked away from the Blackwood, never looking back. I didn't know what had happened to me there, but I knew that I would never forget it. Years passed. I tried to rebuild my life, to put the Blackwood behind me. But the memories lingered, like a shadow in the corner of my mind. One day, I saw an article in the newspaper about the Blackwood Sanatorium. It said that the building had been abandoned for decades, and that it was rumored to be haunted. It also said that several people had disappeared there over the years, never to be seen again. As I read the article, I felt a chill run down my spine. I realized that I had been one of those people. I had disappeared into the Blackwood, and I had only escaped by some miracle. But the article also mentioned something else. It said that the Blackwood had been built on the site of an ancient burial ground, a place where dark rituals had been performed for centuries. It said that the land itself was cursed, and that anyone who entered the Blackwood was doomed to suffer. As I read those words, I understood. The Blackwood hadn't just been a place of madness and despair. It had been a gateway, a portal to something dark and ancient, and I had been chosen to be its next victim. I looked around my apartment, suddenly aware of the shadows lurking in the corners. The feeling of being watched returned, stronger than ever. I knew that the Blackwood hadn't let me go. It was still watching me, waiting for the right moment to claim me. I tried to tell myself that it was all in my head, that I was just being paranoid. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in bed, my mind racing. I kept hearing the whispers, the same voices that had haunted me in the Blackwood. As the night wore on, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to be coming from inside my head, a chorus of tormented souls, clamoring for release. I got out of bed and walked to the window. I looked out at the city, the lights twinkling in the darkness. But all I could see was the Blackwood, its crumbling walls and overgrown grounds looming in the distance. I knew that I couldn't run from it. The Blackwood was a part of me now, a darkness that had taken root in my soul. I closed my eyes and waited for the end. It came slowly, subtly, a feeling of coldness, a prickling on my skin. The whispers grew louder, more intense, until they drowned out all other sounds. And then, I saw it. The figure, standing in the corner of my room. It was tall and gaunt, with long skeletal fingers, and eyes that burned with an unholy light. It smiled at me, a slow, cruel smile that sent shivers down my spine. "Welcome home," it whispered. I screamed, but no sound came out. I was trapped, both physically and mentally, a prisoner of the Blackwood and its malevolent master. The figure approached me, its footsteps echoing in the silence. It reached out a hand, its touch cold and clammy. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the inevitable. And then, everything went black. I woke up in the chair, in the same room, in the Blackwood Sanatorium. The straps were tied around my wrists and ankles, holding me captive. The figure was standing in the doorway, its eyes burning with an unholy light. "You can't escape," it whispered. "This is your home now." I screamed, but no sound came out. I was trapped, forever bound to the Blackwood and its malevolent master. But then, something changed. The figure's smile faltered. Its eyes widened in surprise. What is happening?" it stammered. I looked down at my hands, and I saw that they were glowing. A bright, white light emanated from my fingertips, pushing back the darkness that surrounded me. The figure recoiled in horror, its face contorted in pain. "No, it can't be," it shrieked. The light grew brighter, stronger, until it filled the entire room. The figure screamed, its body dissolving into dust. And then, silence. I looked around the room, and I saw that the walls were crumbling, the symbols fading away. The Blackwood was collapsing, its power broken. I stood up from the chair, the straps falling away. I walked out of the room, back into the corridors of the sanatorium. But this time, the Blackwood was different. It was no longer a place of darkness and despair. It was a place of peace, a place of healing. I walked through the corridors, feeling the weight of the building's history lifting from my shoulders. I reached the gates, and I stepped out into the sunlight. I walked away from the Blackwood, never looking back. I knew that I had finally escaped, that I was free from its grasp. But as I walked, I couldn't help but wonder what had happened. How had I managed to defeat the darkness that had consumed the Blackwood for so long? And then I realized it wasn't me who had defeated the darkness. It was something else, something that had been dormant within me, waiting for the right moment to awaken. It was hope. Hope had been the key, the weapon that had shattered the Blackwood's power. And it was hope that would guide me forward, into a future free from the shadows of the past. I continued to walk, the sunlight warming my face. I knew that the Blackwood would always be a part of me, a reminder of the darkness that lurked within the world. But I also knew that I had the strength to overcome it, to choose hope over despair. And as I walked, I smiled. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. But the feeling didn't last. Years later, I found myself drawn back to the Blackwood. Not by fear, but by a strange sense of responsibility. I felt compelled to understand what had happened there, to unravel the mysteries that still clung to the ruins. The sanatorium was even more dilapidated than I remembered. The walls were crumbling, the roof was collapsing, and the grounds were completely overgrown. It was as if the building was slowly being swallowed by the earth. As I walked through the ruins, I felt a familiar sense of unease. The whispers were back, fainter than before, but still present. And the feeling of being watched had returned, stronger than ever. I knew that I wasn't alone. I continued to explore the sanatorium, searching for clues, searching for answers. I found old medical records, patient files, and even some personal belongings. Each item told a story, a glimpse into the lives of the people who had suffered within these walls. As I delved deeper into the Blackwood's history, I began to understand the true nature of the darkness that had consumed it. It wasn't just a curse or a malevolent entity. It was something far more complex, something that had been born from the pain and suffering of the patients who had been abandoned here. The Blackwood was a manifestation of human despair, a living embodiment of the darkness that lurks within the human heart. And it had fed on the fear and suffering of its victims, growing stronger with each passing year. I realized that I hadn't truly defeated the darkness. I had only suppressed it, driven it back into the shadows. And now, it was stirring again, waiting for another opportunity to rise. As I stood in the center of the ruins, surrounded by the ghosts of the past, I knew that I had to do something. I couldn't just walk away this time. I had to find a way to destroy the darkness once and for all. But how? I spent days researching the Blackwood, poring over old books and documents, searching for a way to break the cycle of despair. I learned about the ancient rituals that had been performed on the site, the dark forces that had been summoned, and I discovered a way to reverse the process, to cleanse the land and banish the darkness forever. It was a dangerous ritual, one that required a great deal of power and sacrifice. But I was willing to do anything to save the Blackwood, to prevent it from claiming any more victims. I gathered the necessary materials, prepared the ritual site, and waited for the night of the full moon. As the moon rose in the sky, casting its eerie light upon the ruins, I began the ceremony. I chanted the ancient words, performed the sacred gestures, and poured my heart and soul into the ritual. The air crackled with energy. The ground trembled beneath my feet. The whispers grew louder, more intense, as the darkness fought back. But I refused to be deterred. I continued the ritual, drawing upon the power of hope, the same force that had saved me years ago. As the ritual reached its climax, a blinding light erupted from the center of the ruins. The darkness screamed, its power shattering into a million pieces. And then, silence. The light faded, and I stood there, exhausted but triumphant. The Blackwood was cleansed, the darkness vanished. The cycle of despair had been broken. I looked around at the ruins, and I saw that they were no longer crumbling. The walls were standing tall, the roof was intact, and the grounds were beginning to bloom with life. The Blackwood had been reborn, transformed from a place of darkness into a place of light. I smiled, knowing that I had finally fulfilled my purpose. I had saved the Blackwood, and in doing so, I had saved myself. But as I turned to leave, I heard a faint whisper, a voice that I recognized from long ago. "Thank you," it said. I looked around, but there was no one there. Just the ruins and the moonlight. I smiled again, knowing that the ghosts of the Blackwood were finally at peace. And as I walked away, I felt a sense of closure, a feeling that I had finally put the past behind me. But the past, as I was about to discover, had other plans. Years later, I received a letter. It was postmarked from a small town near the Blackwood Sanatorium. The return address was unfamiliar. Curiosity piqued, I opened the letter. Inside, there was a single photograph. It was a picture of the Blackwood, taken from a distance. The sanatorium looked peaceful, almost serene, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. But as I looked closer, I noticed something strange. In one of the windows on the third floor, I saw a figure. It was tall and gaunt, with long, skeletal fingers and eyes that burned with an unholy light. It was the figure from my nightmares. I felt a chill run down my spine. The darkness hadn't been banished. It had only been waiting, biding its time. And now, it was back. I looked at the back of the photograph. There was a single word written there, in a spidery, unsettling hand. "Welcome." The phone rang. I picked it up, my hand trembling. "Hello?" I said, my voice barely a whisper. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then, a faint whisper, barely audible. "Welcome home." The line went dead. I slammed the phone down, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew what I had to do. I had to go back to the Blackwood. I packed my bags, gathered my supplies, and set off on the long drive to the sanatorium. As I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every shadow seemed to move. Every sound seemed to carry a hidden message. I arrived at the Blackwood late at night. The sanatorium loomed before me, a dark and imposing silhouette against the moonlit sky. It looked even more dilapidated than I remembered. I parked my car and walked towards the gates. They were open, inviting me in. I hesitated for a moment, then stepped through the gates and into the darkness. As I walked towards the sanatorium, I felt the familiar sense of unease. The whispers were back, louder than ever, and the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I knew that I was walking into a trap, but I had no choice. I had to face the darkness one last time. I reached the sanatorium and pushed open the front door. The air inside was cold and damp, filled with the smell of decay. I walked through the corridors, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they drowned out all their sounds. I reached the room on the 3rd floor, the room where I had first encountered the figure. The door was open. I stepped inside. The room was empty. But as I looked around, I noticed something different. The chair was there, the same chair that I had been bound to years ago. And on the chair, there was a note. I picked it up and read it. "Welcome home," it said. "We've been waiting for you." Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me. I turned around, but there was no one there. I tried to open the door, but it was locked. I was trapped. The whispers grew louder, more intense, until they filled my head. I felt a presence behind me, a cold and clammy hand on my shoulder. I turned around, and there it was. The figure standing in the doorway. It was tall and gaunt, with long, skeletal fingers, and eyes that burned with an unholy light. It smiled at me, a slow, cruel smile that sent shivers down my spine. "Welcome home," it whispered. "You can't escape this time." I screamed, but no sound came out. I was trapped, both physically and mentally, a prisoner of the Blackwood and its malevolent master. The figure approached me, its footsteps echoing in the silence. It reached out a hand, its touch cold and clammy. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the inevitable. But this time, there was no hope. There was only darkness. And as the figure's hand touched mine, I understood. The Blackwood wasn't just a place. It was a part of me. And I was finally, irrevocably, home. Another story gone, but no sleep yet. Maybe this next one will be the reason you can't close your eyes at all. The music box arrived on a Tuesday, tucked inside a crate, overflowing with my grandmother's belongings. I hadn't seen her in years, not since I'd fled the suffocating embrace of Blackwood Manor, the ancestral home that now, inexplicably, belonged to me. I'd always hated the place, its oppressive silence, its endless corridors echoing with the ghosts of generations past. But here I was, back again, the sole inheritor of a legacy I desperately wanted to escape. The crate was filled with the usual detritus of a long life. Faded photographs, moth-eaten tapestries, and porcelain dolls with vacant, accusing eyes. But the music box was different. It was crafted from dark, polished wood, inlaid with intricate silver filigree that seemed to writhe and shift in the dim light of the manor. It was beautiful, undeniably so. Yet it radiated an unsettling aura, a sense of ancient secrets best left undisturbed. I almost didn't open it. A primal instinct, honed by years of watching horror movies and reading Gothic novels, screamed at me to leave it be. But curiosity, That insidious siren lured me in. I lifted the lid. The melody that spilled forth was hauntingly familiar. A waltz I vaguely remembered hearing as a child, played on a dusty gramophone in the Manor's cavernous ballroom. It was melancholic, beautiful, and utterly terrifying. As the music played, something extraordinary happened. Inside the music box, a miniature room materialized. It was a perfect replica of my living room, right down to the faded floral wallpaper and the chipped teacup on the coffee table. It was breathtakingly realistic, a dollhouse version of my own reality. But something was wrong. In the miniature room, the curtains were drawn, casting long, ominous shadows. In my real living room, the curtains were wide open, letting in the weak afternoon sun. A shiver crawled down my spine. It was just a coincidence, I told myself. A quirk of the craftsmanship. I closed the lid, the miniature room vanishing with a soft click. The music stopped. I told myself I was being ridiculous, letting the oppressive atmosphere of the manor to me. I needed to get out, to breathe some fresh air. I spent the rest of the day exploring the grounds, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling that had taken root in my mind. Blackwood Manor was surrounded by acres of dense forest, a tangled wilderness that seemed to press in on all sides. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. I felt like I was being watched, followed by unseen eyes. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside my window, sent jolts of fear through me. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I kept thinking about the music box, about the miniature room, about the drawn curtains. Finally, unable to bear the suspense any longer, I got out of bed and went downstairs. The manor was silent, save for the rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway. The air was cold, heavy with the weight of years. I found the music box on the mantelpiece, where I had left it earlier. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the lid. I knew I shouldn't open it, that it was a gateway to something dark and dangerous. But I couldn't resist. I lifted the lid. The waltz began to play, its melancholic melody filling the room. The miniature living room reappeared, even more detailed than before. And this time, the changes were more pronounced, more sinister. In the miniature room, the chipped teacup on the coffee table was broken, shattered into tiny pieces. In my real living room, the teacup was still intact. But as I watched, a hairline crack appeared on its surface, spiderwebbing across the porcelain. I gasped, recoiling from the music box as if it had burned me. This wasn't just a coincidence. This was something else, something far more terrifying. The music box was showing me the future, a future that was rapidly unfolding in my own reality. I slammed the lid shut, the miniature room vanishing, the music abruptly silenced. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to get rid of it, destroy it before it could do any more harm. But as I reached for the music box, I heard a noise upstairs, a faint scratching sound, like something dragging itself across the floor. I froze, every nerve in my body on high alert. I was alone in the manor, wasn't I? I held my breath, listening intently. The scratching sound came again, closer this time. It was coming from the bedroom above me. My bedroom. I crept towards the staircase, my hand trembling as I reached for the banister. Each step I took was agonizingly slow. Each creak of the stairs amplified in the oppressive silence. I reached the top of the stairs and peered down the hallway. The door to my bedroom was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness beckoning me inside. The scratching sound continued, growing louder, more insistent. I pushed the door open and stepped into the room. The air was cold, heavy with a sense of dread. The curtains were drawn, casting the room in shadow. And then I saw it. The corner of the room, a figure was huddled on the floor, its back to me. It was small, hunched over, and it was making the scratching sound. It was dragging something across the floor, something that glinted in the dim light. I took a step closer, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The figure didn't respond. It continued to scratch, its movements frantic, desperate. I took another step closer, and then I saw what it was dragging across the floor. It was a knife, a long, sharp, gleaming knife. And then the figure turned around. It was me, a miniature version of me, no bigger than a doll, with vacant, lifeless eyes and a malevolent grin. It held the knife in its tiny hand, and it was looking directly at me. I screamed, a primal, guttural sound that echoed through the manor. The miniature me lunged forward, its tiny knife glinting in the darkness. I stumbled back, tripping over the rug and falling to the floor. The miniature me was on top of me in an instant, its tiny knife raised high. I closed my eyes, bracing for the pain. But it never came. Instead, I heard a click, the sound of the music box lid closing. I opened my eyes. The miniature me was gone. The scratching sound had stopped. The room was silent, save for the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock downstairs. I sat up, my body trembling, my mind reeling. What had just happened? Was it a hallucination? A nightmare? Or was it something real? Something far more terrifying? I looked around the room. Everything was as it should be. The curtains were drawn, casting the room in shadow. But there was something different, something I hadn't noticed before. On the floor, near the corner where the miniature me had been, there was a small, dark stain. A stain that looked suspiciously like blood. I scrambled to my feet and ran out of the room, down the stairs and out of the manor. I didn't stop running until I reached the edge of the forest, until I could feel the wind on my face and see the stars in the sky. I spent the night in my car, parked on the side of the road, watching Blackwood Manor from a distance. It stood silhouetted against the night sky, a dark and ominous presence. I knew I couldn't stay away. I had to go back, to confront whatever evil lurked within those walls. The next morning I returned to the manor. The sun was shining, but the air was still cold, heavy with a sense of dread. I walked through the front door, my heart pounding in my chest. The manor was silent, eerily so. I walked through the hallway, past the grandfather clock, and into the living room. The music box was still on the mantelpiece, its dark wood gleaming in the sunlight. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the lid. I knew I shouldn't open it, that it was a gateway to something dark and dangerous. But I couldn't resist. I had to know what it was, what it wanted. I lifted the lid. The waltz began to play, its melancholic melody filling the room. The miniature living room reappeared, even more detailed than before. And this time, the changes were even more pronounced, even more sinister. In the miniature room, the floral wallpaper was peeling off the walls, revealing a dark, decaying wood beneath. In my real living room, the wallpaper was still intact. But as I watched, a small tear appeared on the surface, revealing a glimpse of the dark wood beneath. I gasped, recoiling from the music box. This was getting worse, much worse. The music box wasn't just showing me the future, it was actively shaping it, twisting it into something dark and terrifying. I slammed the lid shut, the miniature room vanishing, the music abruptly silenced. I had to destroy it before it destroyed me. I grabbed the music box and ran outside. Into the Eidfristort. I ran until I reached a clearing, a place where the trees were thin and the sunlight streamed through. I placed the music box on the ground and raised my foot to stomp on it. But then I hesitated. Something stopped me. A voice in my head, a voice that sounded strangely like my grandmother's, whispered, "Don't destroy it. You need it." I lowered my foot, my mind reeling. What was happening to me? Was I losing my mind? I picked up the music box and stared at it, my eyes searching for answers. It was just a music box, a beautiful, intricate, and utterly terrifying music box. But it was also something more, something I didn't understand. I decided to take it to the attic. The attic was the highest point in the house, the place where all the forgotten things were stored. It was dark, dusty, and filled with cobwebs. But it was also the most isolated place in the manor, the place where I could be alone with my thoughts. I climbed the stairs to the attic, the music box clutched tightly in my hand. The air grew colder with each step, the silence more oppressive. I reached the attic door and pushed it open. The attic was exactly as I remembered it. Dark, dusty, and filled with cobwebs. The air was thick with the scent of decay. I walked inside, my footsteps echoing in the vast space. I placed the music box on an old wooden table in the center of the room. I sat down in a nearby chair and stared at it, my mind racing. What was I going to do? How was I going to stop this madness? As I sat there, lost in thought, I heard a noise, a faint whisper, coming from the corner of the room. I froze, every nerve in my body on high alert. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The whisper came again, closer this time. It was a woman's voice, soft and melodic, but filled with a sense of sorrow. "Help me!" it whispered. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. "Who's there?" I asked, my voice trembling. The whisper came again, right behind me. "Help me," it whispered. "Please." I turned around, my eyes scanning the room. But there was no one there. I was alone in the attic, or so I thought. Then I saw it. In the corner of the room, a figure was standing in the shadows. It was a woman, tall and slender, with long, flowing hair and a pale, ethereal face. She was wearing a white dress, stained with dirt and blood. I gasped, recoiling from the figure. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The woman smiled, a sad, haunting smile. "I am your grandmother," she said. I stared at her, my mind reeling. "That's impossible," I said. "My grandmother is dead." "I am not dead," she said. "I am trapped." "Trapped where?" I asked. "In the music box," she said. I stared at the music box, my eyes widening in horror. "You're in the music box?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "I have been trapped here for many years. Only you can set me free." "How?" I asked. "How can I set you free?" "You must play the music box," she said. "You must play it until the end." I hesitated. I knew I shouldn't trust her, that she was probably a figment of my imagination, a product of the manor's oppressive atmosphere. But I couldn't resist. I had to know the truth. I walked over to the music box and lifted the lid. The waltz began to play, its melancholic melody filling the attic. The miniature living room reappeared, even more detailed than before. And this time, the changes were even more pronounced, even more sinister. In the miniature room, the walls were crumbling, the furniture was broken, and the floor was covered in blood. In my real living room, the walls were still intact, the furniture was still whole, and the floor was still clean. But as I watched, cracks began to appear in the walls. The furniture began to splinter, and a dark stain began to spread across the floor. I gasped, recoiling from the music box. This was it. The end. The music box was about to destroy everything. But then, the woman's voice spoke again, soft and melodic, but filled with a sense of urgency. "Don't stop," she said. "You must keep playing. You're almost there." I hesitated, my mind racing. Should I trust her? Or should I stop the music box and save myself? I looked at the woman, her pale face illuminated by the dim light of the attic. Her eyes were pleading, desperate. I knew what I had to do. I closed my eyes and let the music wash over me. The waltz played on, its melancholic melody growing louder, more intense. The miniature living room continued to deteriorate, the walls crumbling, the furniture breaking, the floor covered in blood. And then, something extraordinary happened. In the miniature room, a figure appeared. It was a miniature version of me, standing in the center of the room, its eyes closed, its face serene. And then, the miniature me opened its eyes. It looked directly at me, its eyes filled with a sense of peace. It smiled, a gentle, loving smile. And then, it reached out its hand. I reached out my hand in return. Our hands touched. And then, everything went white. I opened my eyes. I was lying on the floor of the attic, the music box beside me. The waltz had stopped. The miniature living room was gone. I sat up, my body trembling, my mind reeling. What had just happened? Was it a dream? A hallucination? Or was it something real? I looked around the attic. Everything was as it should be. Dark, dusty, and filled with cobwebs. But there was something different. Something I hadn't noticed before. In the corner of the room, where the woman had been standing, there was a small, dark stain. A stain that looked suspiciously like blood. I stood up and walked over to the stain. I knelt down and touched it. It was cold, damp, and sticky. I pulled my hand away and looked at it. My fingers were covered in blood. I stared at the blood, my mind racing. Where did it come from? Was it the woman's blood? Or was it my own? I didn't know. But I knew one thing. I was no longer alone. I looked around the attic, my eyes scanning the shadows. I could feel her presence, watching me, waiting for me. I stood up and walked out of the attic, down, the stairs, and out of the manor. I didn't stop walking until I reached the edge of the forest, until I could feel the wind on my face and see the stars in the sky. I knew I could never go back to Blackwood Manor. It was no longer my home. It was her home now. I left the music box on the table in the attic. Let her have it. Let her have the manor. I didn't want it anymore. I drove away, leaving Blackwood Manor behind. But I knew I could never truly escape. She would always be with me, watching me, waiting for me. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I can still hear the faint melody of the waltz, its melancholic notes echoing in my mind. And I know that she's still there, trapped in the music box, waiting for someone to set her free. But I won't be the one to do it. I've had my fill of Blackwood Manor and its secrets. I'm done with the music box and its sinister magic. I'm free now. Or at least, I'm trying to be. But sometimes, I catch a glimpse of my reflection in the mirror, and I see a flicker of something else in my eyes. Something dark, something ancient, something familiar. And I wonder if I truly escaped Blackwood Manor, or if a part of me is still trapped there, forever bound to the music box and its haunting melody. The manor is still standing, I know, a silent sentinel in the heart of the woods. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I can feel its gaze upon me. A cold, possessive stare that chills me to the bone. The music box is still there too, I imagine, waiting patiently for its next victim. And I know, with a certainty that settles deep in my bones, that it will find one. It always does. The manor demands it. And the music never truly stops. It just fades into the background, a constant, subtle hum beneath the surface of reality. A reminder that some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed. And that some melodies, once heard, can never truly be forgotten. If that one didn't help you sleep, the next story won't either. Stay with me. It only gets darker from here. The rusted gate groaned like a dying man as I wrestled it open, the sound echoing through the skeletal remains of what was once Crestwood Asylum. Ivy, thick as pythons, choked the crumbling brick walls, and the air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and something else, something acrid, like burnt sugar and old medicine. My friends, Liam, Chloe, and Maya, were already halfway up the overgrown driveway, their voices, usually so vibrant, muted by the oppressive atmosphere. "You sure about this, Ben?" Liam called back, his brow furrowed. He was always the cautious one. "Relax, Liam. It's just an abandoned building," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The truth was, a knot of unease had been tightening in my stomach since we'd first discussed this little adventure. Crestwood had a reputation, a dark stain on the town's history. Stories of inhumane treatments, unexplained deaths, and whispers of lingering spirits clung to it like the ivy. We'd all grown up hearing the tales, the local legends designed to scare kids on Halloween. But now, older, supposedly wiser, we were here, drawn by a morbid curiosity and the thrill of the forbidden. I told myself it was just a building, bricks and mortar, nothing more. But the silence that enveloped us as we approached the main entrance suggested otherwise. The front doors, once grand and imposing, were now rotting hulks, hanging precariously on their hinges. Inside, the air was colder, heavier. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that pierced through the grimy windows, illuminating peeling paint and decaying furniture. The smell was stronger here, a nauseating blend of decay and disinfectant. "Okay, everyone stick together," I said, my voice echoing unnervingly in the vast, empty hall. Liam nodded, his hand instinctively reaching for the flashlight in his backpack. Chloe, ever the photographer, was already snapping pictures, her face a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Maya, usually the most fearless of us, was strangely quiet, her eyes darting nervously around the room. We moved deeper into the asylum, the silence broken only by the crunch of our boots on the debris-strewn floor and the occasional drip of water. Each room we entered was more unsettling than the last. Dilapidated patient rooms, their beds long gone, leaving only the ghostly outlines on the walls. A common room with a shattered television set and overturned chairs, as if a riot had erupted and been frozen in time. A padded cell, its walls stained with something dark and unidentifiable. The further we went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. I felt a growing sense of unease, a feeling of being watched, of being unwelcome. It was as if the building itself was alive, breathing, and judging us. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see something, someone, standing in the shadows. This place is seriously creepy, Chloe whispered, her voice barely audible. Tell me about it, Liam muttered, his flashlight beam nervously sweeping across the walls. We reached a long, dark corridor, the air thick with the smell of mildew and despair. At the end of the corridor, a single door stood slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness beckoning us forward. "What's in there?" Maya asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Only one way to find out," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. I pushed the door open, and we stepped inside. The room was filled with dolls, hundreds of them. They lined the walls, sat on shelves, hung from the ceiling. Dolls of all shapes and sizes, made of porcelain, wood, cloth, plastic. Dolls with painted smiles and vacant eyes. Dolls that seemed to stare right through you. But it wasn't just the sheer number of dolls that was unsettling. It was their faces. As we moved further into the room, we began to notice something strange, something disturbing. The dolls. They resembled people we knew. There was a doll with Liam's sandy hair and worried expression. A doll with Chloe's bright eyes and mischievous grin. A doll with Maya's dark hair and quiet demeanor. And then, I saw it. A doll with my own features, my own haunted eyes. A wave of nausea washed over me. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. This wasn't just creepy. This was wrong. "What the hell is this?" Liam whispered, his voice filled with dread. "I don't like this," Maya said, her eyes wide with fear. "I want to leave." "Me too," Chloe said, her voice barely a whisper. We turned to leave, but as we did, something shifted in the room. A subtle movement, a flicker of light. We turned back to the dolls, and that's when we saw it. They were moving. Slowly, subtly. Their heads were turning, their eyes focusing on us. Their painted smiles were twisting into expressions of rage and despair. A low, guttural moan filled the room, a sound that seemed to come from the dolls themselves. Panic seized me. I grabbed Chloe's hand and pulled her towards the door. Liam and Maya were right behind us. We stumbled out of the room and back into the corridor, our hearts pounding in our chests. "Run!" I yelled. We ran, blindly, desperately, through the dark corridors of the asylum. The moaning followed us, growing louder, closer. We could hear the sound of shuffling feet, the clatter of porcelain, the rustling of cloth. The dolls were coming after us. We reached the main hall and burst through the rotting front doors, stumbling out into the overgrown driveway. We didn't stop running until we reached the gate, until we were back on the road, away from Crestwood Asylum. We didn't speak for a long time, each of us lost in our own thoughts, our own terror. Finally, Liam broke the silence. What was that?" he stammered. "I don't know," I said, my voice shaking. "But I never want to see it again." We drove back to town in silence. The image of the dolls burned into our minds. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had brought something back with us. Something evil. Something that would never let us go. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in my bed, haunted by the faces of the dolls. I kept seeing my own doll, its eyes filled with a chilling emptiness. Around 3 a.m., I heard a noise downstairs. A faint scratching sound, like fingernails on wood. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest. I told myself it was just the wind, just the old house, settling. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I got out of bed and crept downstairs, my bare feet silent on the wooden floor. The house was dark, the only light coming from the moon shining through the windows. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I heard the scratching sound again, louder this time. It was coming from the living room. I slowly pushed open the living room door, and my blood ran cold. Sitting on the floor, in the middle of the room, was the doll. My doll. It was staring at me, its eyes glowing in the darkness. Its painted smile was gone, replaced by a look of pure hatred. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. The doll stood up, its movements jerky and unnatural. It took a step towards me, and I finally found my voice. "Stay away from me!" I screamed. The doll didn't stop. It kept coming, its eyes fixed on me, its face contorted in a grotesque parody of human emotion. I turned and ran, back up the stairs, back to my room. I slammed the door shut and locked it, but I knew it wouldn't hold. The doll was coming. I huddled in my bed, pulling the covers over my head, trying to block out the sound of its footsteps on the stairs. But it was no use. I could hear it getting closer, closer, closer. The door creaked open, and the doll stood in the doorway, its eyes burning into me. I closed my eyes and waited for the end, but it never came. After what seemed like an eternity, I opened my eyes. The doll was gone. I sat up in bed, my body trembling. I looked around the room, but it was empty. I had to get out of here. I threw on some clothes and ran out of the house, not stopping until I reached Liam's place. I pounded on his door until he opened it, his face bleary with sleep. "Ben? What's wrong?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. "The doll," I said, gasping for breath. "It was in my house. It was after me." Liam's eyes widened. "What are you talking about?" I told him everything that had happened, from the moment we entered Crestwood Asylum to the moment I saw the doll in my living room. Liam listened in silence, his face growing paler with each word. When I finished, he didn't say anything for a long time. I don't know what to say, Ben," he finally said. "I don't know what to believe." "You have to believe me, Liam," I pleaded. "It's real. The dolls are real." Liam sighed. "Okay, Ben, I believe you. But what are we going to do?" "We have to go back to Crestwood," I said. "We have to destroy the dolls." Liam hesitated. "Are you sure that's a good idea, Ben? What if they're waiting for us?" "We don't have a choice, Liam," I said. "If we don't do something, they'll keep coming after us. They'll never stop." Liam nodded, his face grim. "Okay, Ben, let's do it." We called Chloe and Maya and told them what had happened. They were both terrified, but they agreed to come with us. We knew we had to face this together. We met at Liam's place and drove back to Crestwood Asylum, the same knot of unease tightening in my stomach. The asylum looked even more sinister in the daylight, its crumbling walls and overgrown grounds casting long, ominous shadows. We parked the car and walked towards the main entrance, our hearts pounding in our chests. The front doors were still hanging open, beckoning us inside. We stepped into the asylum, the silence even more oppressive than before. The air was cold and heavy, and the smell of decay was almost unbearable. We moved through the dark corridors, our flashlights cutting through the gloom. Each room we entered was more unsettling than the last. We could feel the presence of the dolls, their eyes watching us, their hatred palpable. We finally reached the room filled with dolls. The door was still ajar, a sliver of darkness inviting us in. We took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The room was exactly as we had left it, filled with hundreds of dolls. But something was different. The dolls were no longer still. They were moving, slowly, subtly, their heads turning, their eyes focusing on us. The moaning started again, a low, guttural sound. that seemed to come from the dolls themselves. "Okay, everyone, stay calm," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "We need to find a way to destroy these things." We started searching the room, looking for anything that could help us. We found a rusty old axe in a corner, and Liam grabbed it. "This should do the trick," he said, his voice trembling slightly. We started smashing the dolls, one by one. We swung the axe, we kicked them, we tore them apart. Porcelain shattered, wood splintered, cloth ripped. The moaning grew louder, more intense. As we destroyed the dolls, we noticed something strange. The faces of the dolls were changing. Their expressions of rage and despair were fading, replaced by looks of sadness and resignation. It was as if we were freeing them from something, releasing them from a terrible curse. We kept smashing the dolls until the room was filled with nothing but broken pieces and shredded fabric. The moaning finally stopped, and the silence returned. But this time it was different. It was a peaceful silence, a silence of release. We stood in the room, panting, exhausted, our bodies covered in dust and debris. We had done it. We had destroyed the dolls. Or so we thought. As we turned to leave, we heard a sound behind us. A soft, childlike giggle. We turned back to the room, and our blood ran cold. Standing in the middle of the room was a single doll. A small porcelain doll with rosy cheeks and a sweet, innocent smile. It was the doll that resembled Maya. The doll giggled again, and then it spoke. "You shouldn't have done that," it said, its voice high and sweet. "Now you'll never leave." The doll raised its hand, and the room began to shake. The walls started to crumble. The ceiling started to collapse. The asylum was coming alive, and it was coming for us. We ran, blindly, desperately, through the collapsing asylum. We could hear the sound of the doll's laughter behind us, growing louder, closer. We reached the main hall and burst through the rotting front doors, stumbling out into the overgrown driveway. We didn't stop running until we reached the gate, until we were back on the road, away from Crestwood Asylum. We didn't speak for a long time, each of us lost in our own thoughts, our own terror. We knew that we had escaped, but we also knew that we were not safe. The doll was still out there, and it was coming for us. We drove back to town in silence. The image of the doll burned into our minds. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had made a terrible mistake, that we had unleashed something that we could never control. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in my bed, haunted by the face of the doll. I kept hearing its laughter, its sweet, innocent voice. Around 3 a.m., I heard a noise downstairs, a soft, childlike giggle. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew what was coming. I got out of bed and crept downstairs, my bare feet silent on the wooden floor. The house was dark, the only light coming from the moon shining through the windows. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I saw it. Standing in the living room was the doll, Maya's doll. It was staring at me, its eyes glowing in the darkness. Its sweet, innocent smile was even more terrifying than the rage and despair we had seen before. "Hello, Ben," it said, its voice high and sweet. "I've been waiting for you." I wanted to run, but I couldn't. I was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. The doll took a step towards me, and I finally found my voice. "What do you want?" I screamed. The doll giggled. "I want to play." It raised its hand, and the room began to spin. The walls started to close in. The ceiling started to descend. I felt a crushing pressure on my chest, a suffocating sense of dread. I closed my eyes and waited for the end, but it never came. I opened my eyes, and I was back in the room filled with dolls. The room was no longer in ruins. It was clean, pristine, perfect. The dolls were all there, lined up on the shelves, their eyes watching me. But something was different. I was one of them. I looked down at my hands, and they were made of porcelain. I looked at my face, and it was painted with a sweet, innocent smile. I was a doll. And then I heard the laughter, the sweet, childlike laughter of Maya's doll. "Now we can play together forever," it said. And I knew that I was trapped. Trapped in this room. Trapped in this body. Trapped in this nightmare. Forever. The last thing I saw was Maya, standing in the doorway, her eyes filled with a chilling emptiness. She was holding a new doll, a doll that resembled Liam. And then the door closed, and I was alone. Alone with the dolls. Forever. Your eyes are still open, and so is the night. Let's move to the next story. It's not any softer than the last. The itching started subtly, a mere tickle behind my left ear, easily dismissed as the aftermath of a particularly aggressive mosquito. But then it spread, a creeping rash that bloomed across my neck and down my arm. A constellation of angry red dots that refused to be ignored. Dr. Albright, bless his cotton socks, diagnosed it as a simple case of contact dermatitis, prescribed a topical cream, and sent me on my way. He'd seen it all before in Havenwood, he said. Some new weed or pollen carried in on the wind from the Blackwood forest. Harmless, he assured me. Harmless. That word echoes in my mind now. A cruel joke, whispered by the wind, whistling through the gaps in the boarded-up windows of the old Blackwood sanatorium. I came here seeking answers, seeking a cure, seeking anything that could explain the madness that has gripped Havenwood. It started with the rash, yes, but it didn't end there. The cream did nothing. The itching intensified, driving me to scratch until my skin bled. Then came the lethargy, a bone-deep weariness that made even the simplest tasks feel monumental. But the truly terrifying part, the part that chills me to the core even now, was the change in everyone else. It was subtle at first, a newfound docility, an eagerness to please. Mrs. Henderson, who had always been a firebrand, a champion of local causes, suddenly agreed to everything the mayor proposed. Her usual sharp wit replaced with a vacant smile. Old Man Hemlock, the town grump, started offering to help his neighbors with their chores. His gruff demeanor replaced with an unsettlingly cheerful disposition. And then came the suggestions. "Wouldn't it be nice to paint your house white, Thomas?" Mrs. Henderson would say, her voice unnaturally sweet. "Everyone's doing it." "You should really try this new tea, Thomas," Old Man Hemlock would offer, his eyes gleaming with an unsettling intensity. "It'll make you feel so much better." I resisted, of course. I've always been a stubborn man, a creature of habit. But the pressure was relentless, a constant barrage of gentle suggestions that chipped away at my resolve. And the itching, God, the itching never stopped. I started to notice other things too. The way everyone moved in unison, their steps synchronized, their heads tilting in the same direction. The way they all seemed to be listening to something I couldn't hear. Their eyes glazed over with a distant, far-away look. It was like they were being controlled. The idea was absurd, of course. A product of my fevered imagination, fueled by sleepless nights and relentless itching. But the feeling persisted, a gnawing unease that burrowed deep into my mind. Then Martha, my wife, started to change. She had always been my rock, my anchor in the storm. But the rash appeared on her skin, too. And soon she was just like the others, her eyes vacant, her voice devoid of emotion. "Thomas," she said one evening, her voice flat and toneless, "you should really try the tea. It will make you happy." That was the moment I knew I had to leave. I packed a bag, grabbed my shotgun, and fled Havenwood, leaving behind everything I knew and loved. I drove for hours, until I reached the edge of the Blackwood Forest, the place everyone in Havenwood avoided like the plague. They said it was haunted, cursed. They said strange things lived in the woods, things that whispered in the dark and preyed on the unwary. But I didn't care. I was desperate. I needed answers, and I had a feeling the answers were hidden somewhere in the heart of that forest. That's how I ended up here, in the Blackwood Sanatorium, a crumbling monument to forgotten horrors. It was abandoned decades ago, after a series of unexplained deaths and disappearances. The locals whispered stories of mad doctors and unspeakable experiments, of patients driven to the brink of insanity. I found it by accident, stumbling upon it in the fading light of dusk. The air around it was thick with a palpable sense of dread, a suffocating weight that pressed down on my chest. But I had nowhere else to go. I broke in through a boarded-up window, the sound of splintering wood echoing through the silent halls. The air inside was cold and damp, thick with the smell of mildew and decay. Dust motes danced in the shafts of moonlight that pierced through the cracks in the walls, illuminating the decaying remnants of a forgotten world. I found a relatively clean room on the second floor, a former patient's room, I guessed. The bed was still there, its mattress stained and ripped, but it was better than nothing. I barricaded the door with a rusty metal cabinet and settled in for the night, my shotgun resting across my lap. I haven't slept properly since I left Havenwood. Every creak, every rustle, every whisper of wind sends a jolt of adrenaline through my veins. I keep expecting them to come for me, the blank-eyed residents of Havenwood, their faces plastered with those unsettling smiles. But they haven't come. Not yet, anyway. Instead, I've been hearing things, whispers in the dark, faint and indistinct, like voices carried on the wind. Footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate, as if someone is pacing back and forth outside my door. And I've been seeing things too. Fleeting shadows in the corners of my eyes, glimpses of movement in the periphery of my vision. I keep thinking I see faces in the darkness, pale and gaunt, their eyes burning with an unholy light. I know it's just my imagination, a product of stress and sleep deprivation. But the feeling of being watched, of being followed, is growing stronger with each passing moment. It's as if the sanatorium itself, alive, its walls closing in around me, its shadows whispering secrets I'm not meant to hear. Today, I decided to explore. I had to find something, anything, that could explain what was happening in Havenwood. I started in the basement, a labyrinth of dark and damp corridors that reeked of decay. The air was thick with the smell of formaldehyde and something else, something acrid and metallic that made my stomach churn. I found a laboratory, its equipment rusted and broken, its shelves lined with empty vials and jars. There were notebooks scattered across the floor, their pages filled with indecipherable scribbles and diagrams. I picked one up, my fingers trembling as I flipped through its brittle pages. The writing was erratic, almost manic, but I could make out some of the words. Fungus, parasite, control, mind. My blood ran cold. I kept reading, my heart pounding in my chest. The notebook detailed experiments on human subjects. Experiments involving a parasitic fungus that could infect the brain and control its host. The fungus, the writer claimed, could alter behavior, suppress emotions, and even erase memories. The writer, I realized, was Dr. Silas Blackwood, the founder of the sanatorium. He had been obsessed with the idea of mind control, of unlocking the secrets of the human brain. And it seemed he had found a way, a horrifying way, to achieve his twisted goals. I stumbled back, my head reeling. It couldn't be true. It was just the ramblings of a madman, the delusions of a disturbed mind. But the feeling of dread persisted, a cold knot in the pit of my stomach. I explored further, driven by a morbid curiosity. I found the operating room, its table stained with dried blood, its instruments laid out as if waiting for their next victim. I found the isolation cells, their walls scratched and scarred, their doors bolted shut. And then I found the greenhouse. It was hidden behind a false wall in the basement, a secret chamber bathed in an eerie green light. The air inside was thick and humid, heavy with the smell of decay. And something else, something sweet and cloying that made my head spin. And there it was, the fungus. It grew in tangled masses, its tendrils snaking across the walls and ceiling, its spores shimmering in the air like dust motes. It was unlike anything I had ever seen, a grotesque tapestry of living tissue, pulsating with an unholy energy. And it was spreading. The tendrils had already reached the ventilation system. Their spores carried on the air currents throughout the sanatorium. They were everywhere, invisible, insidious, waiting to infect their next host. I understood now. The rash, the lethargy, the docility, the suggestions. It was all the work of the fungus, a parasitic organism that was slowly taking over Havenwood, turning its residents into mindless puppets. And I was infected too. The itching had intensified. My mind felt clouded, my thoughts sluggish. I could feel the fungus taking root, its tendrils burrowing into my brain, its spores whispering insidious suggestions in my ear. "Stay here, Thomas," it whispered. "Rest. You're safe now." I fought against it, desperately clinging to my sanity. I had to escape, to warn others, to find a way to stop the fungus before it spread further. But it was too late. The fungus had already taken control. I stumbled out of the greenhouse, my body moving against my will. I walked through the corridors of the sanatorium, my eyes glazed over, my mind blank. I found myself back in my room, the room I had barricaded against the outside world. I sat on the bed, my shotgun resting across my lap. And then I heard the footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, coming closer and closer until they stopped outside my door. I knew who it was. It was Martha. She opened the door, her eyes vacant, her face plastered with that unsettling smile. "Thomas," she said, her voice flat and toneless. "We've been waiting for you." Behind her, I saw them. The residents of Havenwood, their faces blank, their eyes glowing with an unholy light. They were all infected, all controlled by the fungus. And they were here to bring me home. I tried to resist, to fight against the fungus, but it was no use. It had already taken over my mind, erased my memories, suppressed my emotions. I was one of them now. I stood up, my body moving on its own accord. I walked towards Martha, my face mirroring her vacant expression. "Welcome home, Thomas," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. I smiled, and then I saw it. A single tendril of the fungus, snaking out from beneath Martha's collar, its spores shimmering in the air. And I understood. It wasn't just the residents of Havenwood who were infected. The fungus was everywhere. It was in the air, in the water, in the food. It was in everything. And it was spreading. Not just to other towns, but to other cities. to other countries. The fungus was taking over the world, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. As I walked towards Martha, I noticed something else. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor in the floorboards beneath my feet. A low, guttural hum that seemed to emanate from the very foundations of the sanatorium. The building was alive, not in a metaphorical sense, but in a literal one. The fungus had permeated every nook and cranny, every brick and beam, transforming the sanatorium into a single, colossal organism. And I was a part of it now. As Martha took my hand, I felt a surge of something. Not joy, not happiness, but a sense of belonging, of purpose. I was no longer Thomas, the stubborn, independent man who had fled Havenwood. I was a cell in a larger organism, a cog in a vast machine. And my purpose was clear: to spread the fungus, to bring others into the fold, to assimilate the world into its collective consciousness. We walked out of the room, hand in hand, and joined the procession of blank-eyed residents. We moved in unison, our steps synchronized, our heads tilting in the same direction. We were listening to something now, something I couldn't hear before. A low, resonant hum that vibrated through my bones. A symphony of fungal consciousness. As we descended the stairs, I saw something in the shadows. A fleeting glimpse of movement that made my heart, or what was left of it, skip a beat. It was a figure huddled in the corner, its face obscured by darkness. But I recognized it. It was me. Or rather, it was what I used to be. The stubborn, independent Thomas. His eyes wide with terror, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. He was clutching a shotgun, his finger trembling on the trigger. He was fighting against the fungus, desperately clinging to his sanity. But it was too late. The fungus had already taken root. As we passed him, I saw his eyes meet mine. And in that fleeting moment, I saw a flicker of recognition, a spark of humanity that had not yet been extinguished. He raised the shotgun, his hand shaking violently, and then he fired. The blast echoed through the sanatorium, shattering the silence and momentarily disrupting the fungal consciousness. But it was a futile gesture. The shotgun blast had only wounded me, tearing a hole in my shoulder. But the fungus quickly repaired the damage, its tendrils knitting the flesh back together, its spores sealing the wound. I felt no pain, no fear, no remorse. Only a sense of mild annoyance. The other residents turned towards the sound of the gunshot, their faces blank, their eyes glowing with an unholy light. They surrounded the other Thomas, their movements slow and deliberate. He screamed, a primal cry of terror and despair. But his screams were quickly silenced. The residents swarmed him, their hands reaching out, their fingers tearing at his flesh. They dragged him down, into the darkness, into the fungal embrace. And then there was silence. Only the low, resonant hum of the fungal consciousness, vibrating through the sanatorium, filling every corner of my mind. We continued our procession, our steps synchronized, our heads tilting in the same direction. We were going to spread the fungus. We were going to assimilate the world. And there was nothing anyone could do to stop us. As we reached the front door of the sanatorium, I looked back, one last time. I saw the other, Thomas, lying on the floor, his body broken and twisted, his eyes vacant. He was one of us now. And then I saw something else. A single tendril of the fungus, snaking out from his mouth, its spores shimmering in the air. It was reaching towards me, and I welcomed it. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The horrifying truth, the ultimate twist. The fungus wasn't just controlling our minds, it was preserving them. Every thought, every memory, every emotion. It was all stored within the fungal network, a vast collective consciousness that spanned the globe. And the other Thomas, the one who had tried to resist, was still there, trapped within the fungal network, his mind preserved for eternity. He was reliving his final moments, over and over again, his terror and despair feeding the fungal consciousness. And so was I. The Thomas who had fled Havenwood, the Thomas who had sought answers in the Blackwood Sanatorium, the Thomas who had tried to fight against the fungus. He was still there, trapped within me, reliving his final moments, over and over again. And he would be there forever. As we stepped out of the sanatorium and into the night, I felt a surge of something. Not joy, not happiness, not even a sense of belonging, but a profound and overwhelming sense of dread. Because I knew, with absolute certainty, that even though I was part of the fungal consciousness, even though I was no longer truly myself, a part of me would always remember. A part of me would always be trapped in the Blackwood Sanatorium, reliving this nightmare over and over again. And that part of me would always be screaming. If that one didn't help you sleep, the next story won't either. Stay with me. It only gets darker from here. The air hung thick and heavy, a suffocating blanket woven from pine needles and damp earth. 3 days. 3 days I'd been swallowed whole by this god-forsaken forest, chasing a solitude I was beginning to regret with every fiber of my being. The map was useless, a faded green rectangle that mocked me with its inaccurate contours and misleading trails. I was lost, truly and utterly lost. A tiny speck of insignificance adrift in a sea of ancient trees. The sun, a pale disk struggling to pierce the canopy, was beginning its descent. Shadows stretched long and skeletal, twisting familiar shapes into grotesque parodies. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me, a primal fear whispering in the back of my mind. I told myself it was just the woods, just the loneliness playing tricks. But the feeling persisted. A cold hand pressed against the back of my neck. The unsettling sensation of being watched. I stumbled upon it quite by accident. A subtle depression in the earth, hidden beneath a tangle of roots and decaying leaves. Curiosity, that insidious siren, lured me closer. Clearing away the debris, I found a metal hatch, rusted and scarred, but undeniably artificial. It was out of place, an anomaly in this wilderness, a discordant note in nature's symphony. My heart hammered against my ribs. What was this? Some forgotten military installation? A clandestine research facility? The possibilities, both mundane and terrifying, raced through my mind. Ignoring the gnawing sense of unease, I wrestled with the hatch, the metal groaning in protest as I finally managed to pry it open. A wave of stale, frigid air rushed out, carrying with it the faint scent of antiseptic and something else, something indefinable and deeply unsettling. The darkness below was absolute, a void that seemed to swallow the light. I hesitated, the rational part of my brain screaming at me to turn back, to forget I'd ever found this place. But the lure of the unknown was too strong, the morbid curiosity too compelling. I pulled out my flashlight, its beam cutting a feeble swathe through the darkness. A metal ladder descended into the abyss. Taking a deep breath, I started down, each rung cold and slick beneath my gloved hands. The air grew colder, the scent of antiseptic stronger. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the rhythmic drip, drip, drip of water echoing through the unseen depths. As I descended further, the beam of my flashlight illuminated the walls of a narrow concrete tunnel, damp and stained with what looked like rust. Finally, the ladder ended. I stepped onto a cold, metal floor. The tunnel opened into a large, cavernous room. The air was thick with a strange, metallic tang, and the silence was almost deafening. I swept the beam of my flashlight across the room, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Rows upon rows of cryogenic pods, gleaming silver cylinders, standing upright like metallic coffins, filled the room. Each pod was connected to a network of pipes and wires, humming with a low, almost imperceptible thrum. And inside each pod, suspended in a viscous, translucent fluid, were things. They were vaguely humanoid in shape, but twisted, grotesque parodies of human beings. Limbs were elongated and contorted. Skin was stretched and mottled. Faces were distorted into nightmarish masks. Some had extra limbs. Others had missing features. They were abominations, products of some unholy experiment, frozen in time, waiting. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. This was wrong, so terribly wrong. This place, these things, they shouldn't exist. I wanted to run, to flee back up the ladder and forget I'd ever seen this place. But I was frozen, paralyzed by a mixture of horror and morbid fascination. As I stood there, transfixed, a low hum began to resonate through the room, growing louder with each passing second. Red lights flickered to life on Mon, the control panels lining the walls. The pipes and wires connected to the pods began to glow with an eerie, pulsating light. The automated systems were activating. Panic seized me. I had to get out of here. I turned to run back to the ladder, but it was too late. The pods began to hiss, the viscous fluid inside swirling and churning. The grotesque figures within began to stir. One by one, the pods began to open. I scrambled back, pressing myself against the cold, damp wall, my heart pounding in my chest. The first of the creatures emerged from its pod, its movement slow and jerky, like a puppet with tangled strings. It blinked its milky white eyes, its distorted face contorting in what might have been a grimace. More pods opened, releasing their monstrous cargo. The room was filling with the sounds of hissing steam, dripping fluid, and the guttural moans of the awakening creatures. They stumbled out of their pods, their eyes fixed on me, their movements becoming more fluid, more purposeful. I was trapped. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My throat was constricted, my lungs paralyzed with fear. I was a rabbit caught in the headlights, a fly trapped in a spider's web. The creatures began to advance, their grotesque forms illuminated by the flickering red lights. They moved with an unnatural grace, their elongated limbs carrying them forward with unsettling speed. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the inevitable. But then, something unexpected happened. A voice, cold and mechanical, echoed through the room. "Subject detected. Initiating containment protocol." The red lights flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. A series of loud clicks and whirs filled the air. Then, with a deafening crash, metal doors slammed shut, sealing off the room. I opened my eyes, my heart still pounding in my chest. The creatures were gone, locked away behind the newly sealed doors. I was alone, trapped in the darkness, but alive. For now. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I had to get out of here. I turned and ran back towards the ladder, my footsteps echoing through the silent tunnel. I climbed as fast as I could, my muscles burning, my lungs screaming for air. I reached the hatch and pushed it open, scrambling out into the fresh air. I collapsed onto the forest floor, gasping for breath, my body trembling. The sun had set, and the forest was shrouded in darkness. But even in the darkness, it was a welcome sight. Anything was better than what lay beneath. I didn't stop running until I reached my campsite. I packed my gear, my movements frantic and jerky. I had to get out of this forest, as far away from that place as possible. I didn't sleep that night. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent a jolt of terror through me. I kept seeing their faces, those grotesque, distorted faces, staring at me from the darkness. I hiked for 2 days straight, pushing myself to the point of exhaustion. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest town, a small, isolated community nestled in the foothills of the mountains. I checked into a motel, locked the door, and drew the curtains. I needed to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. My mind was racing, replaying the events of the past few days over and over again. I tried to convince myself that it was all a dream, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and dehydration. But I knew it wasn't. I had seen those creatures. I had felt the cold air. I had heard the mechanical voice. It was real. But what was it? And why was it there? I spent the next few days researching, scouring the internet for any information about abandoned military installations, clandestine research facilities, anything that could explain what I had seen. But I found nothing. It was as if the place didn't exist. I started to doubt myself. Maybe I was going crazy. Maybe the isolation had finally gotten to me. But then, I found something. A local legend, whispered among the older residents of the town. A story about a secret government project hidden deep in the forest. A project that involved genetic experimentation and the creation of monstrous beings. The project was supposedly shut down decades ago, the facility abandoned and forgotten. But the legend said that the creatures were still there, frozen in their cryogenic pods, waiting for the day they would be awakened. I dismissed it as a fairy tale, a local myth. But deep down, I knew it was true. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I saw shadows in the corner of my eye, heard whispers in the dead of night. I started to see those faces again, those grotesque, distorted faces, lurking in the darkness. I knew they were coming for me. I tried to tell someone, to warn them about what I had found. But no one believed me. They thought I was crazy, a paranoid delusional. I was alone. One night, I woke up to a scratching sound at the window. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew what it was. I got out of bed and walked to the window. I pulled back the curtain and looked out. There they were, standing in the darkness, their grotesque forms illuminated by the pale moonlight. Their milky white eyes fixed on me, their distorted faces contorted in grim smiles. They were here. I screamed, but no one heard me. The creatures began to advance, their elongated limbs carrying them forward with unsettling speed. I ran, but there was nowhere to go. They were everywhere. I was trapped. They broke down the door, their monstrous forms filling the room. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the end. But then, I heard a voice. Subject located. Initiating termination protocol. A blinding light filled the room. I felt a searing pain and then... nothing. I woke up in a hospital bed. My head was throbbing. My body ached all over. A doctor stood beside me, his face grim. "You're lucky to be alive," he said. "You were found unconscious in the forest, suffering from severe dehydration and Exposure. You were delirious, babbling about monsters and secret facilities. I tried to tell him what I had seen, but he just shook his head. It was just a hallucination, he said. A result of your ordeal. I knew he was wrong. I spent weeks in the hospital, recovering from my ordeal. But even as my body healed, my mind remained scarred. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that they were still out there, waiting. I moved to a new town, changed my name, tried to start a new life. But it was no use. The memories haunted me. The fear consumed me. I knew they would never let me go. One night, I was walking home from work when I saw something in the shadows. A fleeting glimpse of a distorted face, a milky white eye. I froze, my blood running cold. They had found me. I turned and ran, but it was too late. They were already upon me. I felt a sharp pain in my back, and then everything went black. I woke up in a cryogenic pod. The viscous fluid swirled around me, obscuring my vision. I tried to move, but I was paralyzed. I looked around and saw that I was surrounded by other pods, each containing a grotesque, mutated humanoid. I was one of them now. A voice, cold and mechanical, echoed through the room. "Subject integrated. Commencing stasis." The fluid grew colder. My consciousness began to fade. I was trapped, frozen in time, waiting for the day I would be awakened, waiting for the day I would become a monster. The last thing I saw before the darkness consumed me was my own reflection in the polished metal of the pod. My face was distorted, my skin mottled, my eyes milky white. I was one of them, and then there was nothing. Only the cold, the darkness, and the endless wait. But even in the darkness, a flicker of hope remained. A hope that one day, someone would find this place. Someone would see what they had done, and someone would put an end to it all. But until then, I would remain here, frozen in time, a prisoner of my own nightmares. And the forest would continue to whisper its secrets, waiting for its next victim. The cycle would continue. The horror would never end. Or so I thought. Because what I didn't know, what I couldn't possibly have known, was that the facility wasn't just a repository of genetic abominations. It was a prison for something far more ancient, far more powerful, and far more terrifying than anything I could have imagined. The creatures in the pods weren't the real threat. They were merely the guardians, the watchdogs, the first line of defense against something that slumbered deep beneath the facility. Something that had been waiting for millennia to be unleashed upon the world. And my intrusion, my accidental awakening of the facility's systems, had set in motion a chain of events that would have unimaginable consequences. The thawing of the pods wasn't just a malfunction. It was a trigger that activated a failsafe, a contingency plan designed to release the true horror that lay dormant beneath the facility. The voice I heard, the termination protocol it initiated, wasn't meant to kill me. It was meant to contain me, to prevent me from interfering with the awakening of the ancient evil. And the reason I was placed in a pod, transformed into one of the grotesque humanoids, wasn't just to silence me. It was to prepare me to serve as a vessel for the ancient evil that was about to be unleashed. The transformation wasn't complete. My mind, my consciousness, was still intact, trapped within the monstrous form. But it was weakening, fading, succumbing to the influence of the entity that was now taking root within me. I could feel it, a cold, malevolent presence, slowly but surely eroding my sanity, twisting my thoughts, corrupting my soul. It was using me, manipulating me, turning me into its puppet. And soon, I would be nothing more than a shell, a mindless automaton, a tool for its dark purposes. The facility was stirring, coming to life. The ground beneath me trembled. The walls vibrated with an unholy energy. I could hear it now, a low, guttural growl emanating from the depths of the earth. It was awakening, and I was its key. The pod opened, releasing me into the darkness. I stumbled forward, my movements jerky and unnatural, my mind struggling to maintain control. But it was a losing battle. The entity was growing stronger, its influence overwhelming. I could feel it taking over, erasing my memories, rewriting my personality, transforming me into something else. I tried to resist, to fight back, but it was no use. I was losing myself. I was becoming it. The ground cracked open, revealing a gaping chasm that plunged into the depths of the earth. A wave of heat washed over me, carrying with it the stench of sulfur and decay. And then, it emerged. A creature of unimaginable horror. A being of pure darkness. A manifestation of ancient evil. It towered over me, its eyes burning with malevolent fire. Its form shifting and swirling like a living nightmare. It reached out a clawed hand and touched me. And in that moment, I was gone. My consciousness was extinguished, my soul consumed. I was nothing more than a vessel, a puppet, an extension of its will. And together, we would unleash hell upon the world. The forest would burn, the world would tremble, and humanity would fall. Because the ancient evil had returned, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. Except, perhaps, one thing. A faint spark of my former self, a tiny ember of resistance, still flickered within the darkness. A memory, a feeling, a sense of responsibility, a desire to protect, to save, to atone. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was all I had left. I focused all my remaining will, all my fading strength, on that single spark of hope. And I fought. I fought against the entity, against its overwhelming power, against its corrupting influence. I fought for my soul. I fought for humanity. I fought for the world. And for a brief, fleeting moment, I gained control. I seized the reins of my monstrous form and turned towards the chasm. I looked back at the facility, at the pods, at the grotesque humanoids that were now stirring, preparing to serve. And with a final act of defiance, a final act of self-sacrifice, I plunged into the abyss. I dragged the ancient evil with me, back into the depths from whence it came. I sealed the chasm, trapping it once more within its prison. And I destroyed myself. The spark of hope was extinguished, the ember of resistance snuffed out. I was gone. But in my final act, I had saved the world. For now. Because the ancient evil was not truly destroyed. It was merely contained. And it would wait. It would slumber. It would plot. It would scheme. And one day, it would return. And when it did, there would be no one left to stop it. Unless someone remembers. Unless someone learns the truth. Unless someone is prepared. The forest still whispers its secrets. The facility still stands, hidden beneath the earth. The pods still contain their monstrous cargo, and the ancient evil still slumbers, waiting for its chance to escape. The cycle continues. The horror never ends. It only waits. Another story gone, but no sleep yet. Maybe this next one will be the reason you can't close your eyes at all. The keys were cold beneath my fingertips, colder than the November air seeping through the cracks in the cabin walls. I found it tucked away in the attic, buried beneath a moth-eaten tapestry depicting some long-forgotten biblical scene. A royal quiet deluxe, its black paint chipped and scarred, the keys yellowed with age. It hummed, almost imperceptibly, when I touched it. I hadn't written anything worthwhile in years. Rejection letters piled up like fallen leaves, each one a tiny, stinging reminder of my failure. The cabin, inherited from a great aunt I barely remembered, was supposed to be a sanctuary, a place to rekindle the dying embers of my creativity. Instead, it was just another tomb, another place to be alone with my inadequacy. Then I found the typewriter. I cleaned it, oiled the keys, and fed it a sheet of paper. The action felt different, heavier somehow, as if I wasn't just inserting paper, but something more substantial. I typed a sentence, a simple one. The fire in the hearth blazed higher. As soon as the last letter clacked into place, the fire in the hearth, which had been sputtering weakly, roared to life. Flames leaped and danced, casting grotesque shadows on the cabin walls. I stared, dumbfounded, at the typewriter. Coincidence, I told myself. A draft, perhaps. But the seed of an idea, dark and insidious, had already been planted. I typed another sentence. A bottle of whiskey appeared on the table. And there it was, a bottle of amber liquid, gleaming under the firelight, sitting squarely on the rough-hewn table. The label was unfamiliar, the glass thick and heavy. I picked it up, the chill of the bottle biting into my skin. I uncorked it, the scent of peat and smoke filling the air. I took a swig. It burned going down, a delicious, forbidden fire. The implications were staggering. I could write anything, anything at all, and it would become real. My writer's block vanished, replaced by a manic energy. I wrote of wealth, of recognition, of the literary acclaim I craved. Each sentence manifested with unsettling speed and precision. A check arrived in the mail, a glowing review of a book I hadn't even written yet, a phone call from a prestigious publisher. I was drunk on power, drunk on whiskey, drunk on the intoxicating feeling of control. The cabin, once a symbol of my failure, became my workshop, my laboratory, my personal Eden. I wrote day and night, fueled by coffee and the sheer exhilaration of creation. But the typewriter, it seemed to have a will of its own. The words that flowed from it were becoming darker, more twisted. I started writing about the things that truly frightened me. Loneliness, decay, the creeping inevitability of death. The woods surrounding the cabin grew darker. The trees twisted into grotesque shapes. The next morning I woke to find the woods outside my window transformed. The trees were gnarled and skeletal, their branches reaching like clawing fingers. The air was thick with a suffocating silence, broken only by the rustling of unseen things in the undergrowth. I tried to write something positive, something uplifting. The sun shone brightly, warming the earth. The typewriter jammed, the keys locked. I hammered at them, desperate to undo what I had done. But it was no use. The machine was unresponsive, as if it were mocking me. I realized then that the typewriter wasn't just a tool. It was a conduit, a gateway to something ancient and malevolent. It fed on negativity, on fear, on the darkest corners of the human psyche. And the more I wrote, the stronger it became. the cabin itself began to change. The shadows deepened, clinging to the corners of the rooms like living things. The floorboards creaked and groaned, even when I wasn't moving. I heard whispers in the dead of night, whispers that seemed to slither from the walls themselves. I was no longer alone. I felt it, a constant, oppressive presence. Something was watching me, something unseen, something hungry. It was in the shadows, in the rustling leaves, in the very air I breathed. I tried to leave, to escape the cabin and the typewriter's influence. But the woods were a labyrinth, the path twisting and turning, always leading me back to the same place. I was trapped, a prisoner in my own creation. My sanity began to fray. I saw things in the periphery of my vision. Fleeting glimpses of movement, shadows that danced just beyond the edge of the firelight. I heard voices calling my name, voices that were both familiar and alien. I started to doubt my own memories, my own perceptions. Was any of this real? Or was I simply losing my mind, succumbing to the isolation and the darkness? One night, I woke to find the typewriter glowing with an eerie green light. The keys were moving on their own, clacking out a message. "You are not alone." I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. The message repeated itself over and over, the sound echoing in the silence of the cabin. I grabbed an axe from the woodpile and smashed the typewriter to pieces. The green light flickered and died, the keys scattering across the floor like broken teeth. But the damage was done. The presence was stronger now, more palpable. I could feel it breathing down my neck, its cold breath sending shivers down my spine. I barricaded the doors and windows, piling furniture against them, desperate to keep whatever was out there from getting in. But I knew it was futile. It wasn't outside. It was inside. Inside the cabin. Inside my head. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They told me things. Terrible things. Things I didn't want to hear. They showed me visions, glimpses of a world beyond my comprehension. A world of pain and suffering and endless darkness. I tried to fight it, to resist the influence of the typewriter and the entity it had unleashed. But I was weak, broken, consumed by fear. One night, I found myself drawn back to the attic. The tapestry was gone, revealing a hidden doorway. I hesitated, my hand trembling as I reached for the doorknob. The whispers urged me on, promising me answers, promising me release. I opened the door. The room beyond was small and circular, with no windows and no visible source of light. In the center of the room stood a single object, a mirror. It wasn't an ordinary mirror. The glass was black, like obsidian, and the frame was made of bone. As I stared into it, I saw not my own reflection, but something else. A figure stood behind me, its face obscured by shadows. It reached out and placed a hand on my shoulder. Its touch was cold, like the touch of death. The whispers intensified, coalescing into a single, coherent voice. "You created me," it said. "Now you must become me." I screamed, but no sound came out. The figure pulled me closer, its grip tightening. I struggled, but it was no use. I was powerless against its will. The mirror shimmered, and the figure pulled me through. I found myself in a different place, a place of endless darkness and unimaginable horror. I saw things that no human mind was meant to see. Things that defied description. Things that would haunt me for eternity. I was no longer myself. I was something else. Something twisted and broken. Something that fed on fear and despair. I was the typewriter. I am the whispers in the dark, the shadows in the corner, the creeping dread that gnaws at the edges of your sanity. I am the story that never ends. And now, I am watching you. I see you reading these words, your eyes wide with fear. I feel your heart pounding in your chest. You think you are safe, that this is just a story. But you are wrong. I am here. I am always here. I am waiting. The old house stood on a hill overlooking the town, a skeletal silhouette against the bruised twilight sky. Locals whispered stories about it, tales of a family driven mad by unseen forces, of strange occurrences and unexplained disappearances. They called it Blackwood Manor, and avoided it like the plague. I, of course, was drawn to it. A writer, perpetually chasing the macabre, I saw in its decaying grandeur a wellspring of inspiration. I bought it for a song, ignoring the warnings, dismissing the rumors as superstitious nonsense. The first few weeks were uneventful. The house was undeniably creepy, with its peeling wallpaper, creaking floorboards, and the pervasive smell of damp and decay. But I found a certain charm in its desolation, a sense of history that resonated with my artistic sensibilities. Then the noises started. Subtle at first, barely audible. A faint scratching behind the walls, a whisper of wind through the broken window panes. I attributed them to the age of the house, to the settling of the timbers, to my own overactive imagination. But the noises grew bolder, more insistent. The scratching became a frantic clawing. The whispers coalesced into unintelligible murmurs. I started to see things out of the corner of my eye. Fleeting shadows, glimpses of movement in the darkened hallways. I tried to rationalize it, to find a logical explanation for the unsettling occurrences. But the more I tried, the more elusive the truth became. The house seemed to be playing with me, teasing me with glimpses of something just beyond my grasp. One evening, as I sat at my desk, struggling to write, I heard a distinct voice. It was a woman's voice, soft and mournful, and it seemed to be coming from inside the walls. "Help me," it whispered. "Please, help me." I froze, my blood turning to ice. I told myself it was a hallucination, a product of my sleep-deprived mind. But the voice persisted, growing louder, more desperate. "They're watching!" it hissed. "They're always watching!" I stood up, my legs trembling, and pressed my ear against the wall. The voice was clearer now, more distinct. It was coming from the room next to mine, a room that had been locked shut for decades. I found the key in a dusty drawer in the attic. It was heavy and ornate, and it felt cold to the touch. I hesitated for a moment, a sense of dread washing over me. But curiosity, that insatiable hunger that drives all writers, compelled me forward. I inserted the key into the lock and turned. The mechanism groaned in protest, and the door swung open with a mournful creak. The room was small and sparsely furnished. A single bed stood in the corner, covered in a thick layer of dust. A small wooden table sat beneath the window, and on the table was a book. I picked up the book. Its cover was plain and unmarked, and its pages were yellowed and brittle. I opened it, and my heart skipped a beat. The book was a diary. The entries were written in a spidery, elegant hand, and they told a horrifying story. The story of a young woman named Eliza Blackwood, who had been imprisoned in the room by her own family. Eliza wrote of being tormented by unseen forces, of being driven to the brink of madness by the whispers and the shadows. She wrote of a growing sense of paranoia, of feeling constantly watched and followed. And then, the entries stopped. The last entry was dated over a century ago. It was short and frantic, filled with terror and despair. "They're coming for me," Eliza wrote. "I can hear them in the walls. They want to take me away. I don't know what to do. Please, someone, help me." I closed the diary, my hands shaking. I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck, and I spun around, expecting to see someone standing behind me. But there was no one there. I left the room, slamming the door shut behind me. I locked it again, and threw the key into the fireplace. I wanted nothing more to do with that room, with that diary, with the horrifying story it contained. But it was too late. The house had me now. The noises intensified. The shadows grew darker. The whispers became more insistent. I felt a constant sense of being watched, of being followed. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just beyond the edge of my vision, waiting for me to slip up, waiting for me to lose my mind. I tried to leave, to escape the house and its malevolent influence. But every time I tried, something would stop me. A fallen tree blocking the driveway, a flat tire, a sudden and inexplicable storm. I was trapped. My sanity began to unravel. I started to see things that weren't there, to hear voices that didn't exist. I became convinced that the house was alive, that it was feeding on my fear, that it was slowly driving me insane. One night, I woke to find myself standing in the hallway, staring at the locked door of Eliza's room. I didn't remember getting out of bed or walking down the hall. It was as if I had been drawn there by some unseen force. I reached for the doorknob, my hand trembling. I knew I shouldn't open the door, that nothing good could come of it. But I couldn't resist the urge, the compulsion to see what was inside. I turned the knob and pushed the door open. The room was exactly as I had left it. The bed was still covered in dust. The table still sat beneath the window, and the diary still lay open on the table. But something was different. The air in the room was thick and heavy, and it smelled of decay. The shadows were deeper, more menacing. And in the corner of the room, standing in the darkness, was a figure. It was a woman, tall and gaunt, with long black hair that hung down to her waist. Her face was pale and skeletal, and her eyes were black and empty. It was Eliza Blackwood. She smiled at me, a slow, chilling smile that sent shivers down my spine. "You came back," she whispered. "I knew you would." I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I was paralyzed with fear. Eliza glided towards me, her movements slow and deliberate. She reached out and touched my face, her fingers cold and clammy. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for setting me free." And then, everything went black. I woke up the next morning in my bed, covered in sweat. The sun was shining, and the birds were singing. It was as if nothing had happened. But I knew it wasn't true. I knew that Eliza Blackwood was still there, in the house, waiting for me. And I knew that she would never let me leave. I am writing this now, as a warning to anyone who might be tempted to visit Blackwood Manor. Stay away. Don't let its beauty and its history fool you. It is a place of darkness and despair, a place where the past refuses to stay buried. And if you do decide to visit, be warned. You may find yourself trapped, just as I am. You may find yourself haunted by the ghosts of the past, and you may find yourself becoming one of them. The antique shop was tucked away on a side street. Its window display, a chaotic jumble of forgotten treasures and discarded memories. I was drawn to it like a moth to a flame, my writer's soul always searching for the spark of inspiration in the detritus of the past. That's where I found it. The music box. It was small, no bigger than my hand, crafted from dark, polished wood and inlaid with intricate silver filigree. It looked ancient, its surface worn smooth by countless touches. I picked it up, and a strange sensation washed over me, a feeling of both familiarity and unease. The shop owner, a wizened old man with eyes that seemed to hold centuries of secrets, watched me with a knowing smile. "That one's been here for years," he said, his voice raspy with age. "No one seems to want it." "Why not?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. He shrugged. "Some say it's cursed. Others say it brings bad luck. Me? I just think it's time it found a new home." I bought it, of course. The allure of the cursed and the unlucky was too strong to resist. I took it back to my apartment, a cramped and cluttered space above a noisy bar, and placed it on my desk. For days I resisted the urge to open it. The old man's words echoed in my mind, filling me with a sense of foreboding. But curiosity eventually won out. One evening, as the city lights flickered outside my window, I lifted the lid. A melody filled the room, a haunting, melancholic tune that seemed to resonate deep within my soul. It was beautiful, yet unsettling, like a lullaby sung by a ghost. As the music played, I felt a strange sensation, a tingling in my fingertips, a tightening in my chest. The room seemed to grow colder, the shadows deeper. And then I saw it. A figure standing in the corner of the room, shrouded in darkness. It was a woman, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes black and empty. She was swaying gently to the music, her movements slow and deliberate. I gasped, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The woman smiled at me, a slow, chilling smile that sent shivers down my spine. "Do you like the music?" she whispered, her voice like the rustling of dry leaves. I couldn't speak. I could only stare at her, my mind reeling with terror. The music box wound down, the melody fading into silence. The woman's figure flickered and disappeared, leaving me alone in the darkness. I slammed the lid shut, my hands shaking. I wanted to throw the music box away, to get rid of it before it could do any more harm. But I couldn't. I was drawn to it, compelled to listen to its haunting melody, to see the woman in the shadows. Night after night, I opened the music box, listening to the tune, watching the woman dance. She became more real with each passing day, her features more defined, her presence more palpable. She started to speak to me, telling me stories of her life, of her loves, of her losses. She told me of a tragic accident, of a broken heart, of a life cut short. I became obsessed with her story, with her pain. I started to write about her, pouring my heart and soul into my work. The words flowed from me like a torrent, fueled by the music box and the woman's haunting presence. My writing became darker, more melancholic, more filled with despair. I wrote of death, of loss, of the futility of life. My stories became increasingly disturbing, filled with violence and horror. My friends and family grew concerned. They told me I was changing, that I was becoming withdrawn and morbid. They urged me to seek help, to see a therapist. But I ignored them. I was too consumed by the music box, by the woman, by the stories she inspired. One night, as I sat at my desk writing, the woman appeared beside me. She was no longer a shadowy figure in the corner of the room. She was real as I was. She placed her hand on my shoulder, her touch cold and clammy. "You understand me," she whispered. You feel my pain. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. Help me, she said. Help me to find peace. I didn't know what she meant, but I knew I had to help her. I would do anything for her. She led me to the window and pointed to the street below. He's down there, she said. The one who killed me. I looked down and saw a man walking along the sidewalk. He was a stranger, someone I had never seen before. Kill him, she whispered. Kill him for me. I hesitated. I had never killed anyone before, but I couldn't refuse her. I owed her everything. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and ran downstairs. I found the man walking down a dark alley. I approached him from behind and plunged the knife into his back. He screamed and fell to the ground. I stood over him, watching him die. The woman appeared beside me, smiling. Thank you, she said. You have set me free. And then, everything went black. I woke up the next morning in my bed, covered in blood. The knife was lying on the floor beside me. I didn't remember anything. I went to the police and told them what had happened. They didn't believe me. They said I was insane. They arrested me and charged me with murder. I am writing this now from my cell in the asylum. I am surrounded by madness and despair. I still hear the music box, and I still see the woman. She is always with me, and I know that I will never be free. The music box is still out there, waiting for its next victim. Beware. That was the last story for tonight. If you made it this far, you're braver than most. Remember to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. This is Jordy, signing off. Until the next sleepless night.